Hey, what's going on, guys? Today I bring you a Who Did It Best extended version for the AWA Remco style figures. Now, generally, when we do these sort of Who Did It Best videos, it generally entails a 1 minute short video, and it's more centered around the LJN style figures, of course, but because there are so many Remco style figures out there. Now, there are a lot of companies out there, of course. We do a lot of Hasbro style videos centering around these many companies like Hastel Toys, Grapplers, and Gimmicks, right? We take a look at Zombie Sailors, Heels and Faces. We look at Rush Collectibles, Ringmasters. We look at Cella Toys / Epic Toys. So we look at Hasbro style figures. We take a look at LJN. Then we start looking at these companies that kind of have their LJN style figures, such as Random Treasures, which does amazing custom style figures. We look at the big rubber guys. Soon enough, we're going to start looking at a new company which are fabricating their own LJN style figures called Latuni. So I'm still waiting on some figures from them as well. But Remco. Remco was an absolutely huge manufacturer of wrestling action figures of the 1980s. And nobody is ever really talking about a lot of the Remco style figures. So today we are going to look at not only a lot of the Remco style figures, which includes, of course, the name brand company Remco itself, but we're going to look at some of the knockoff figures that are reminiscent of those style figures. We're also going to look at some of the more modern day action figures. So, first and foremost, I'm going to see if I can increase the size here. Right off the bat, I'm going to actually get it a little closer. The figures that started it off. All right. We got Ric Flair and we got Baron von Raschke. I only selected a couple of figures from each of the different brands that we're going to look at. So I am going to kind of go over a couple of them really quickly. That way you kind of know which companies we're going to be taking a look at. So in the 1980s, Remco. Now, here's the thing about Remco that you got to know about. First and foremost, I knew of Remco growing up as a kid. Now, I always considered Remco to be a bootleg or sort of knockoff company. Like, when I think about like G.I. Joe or He-Man or stuff like that, right? I always thought of like Remco of being like this company that took these popular cartoons and toy lines that were out there, and they created their own off-brand of what was popular. So I didn't really, I considered Remco to be their own bootleg company. So I was never a fan of Remco. But here's another thing. These figures right here, these bootleg figures. So these right here, you're gonna find these bootlegs. You're gonna look at a couple of different lines. Namely, there are a couple of 2-packs simply named Wrestler. You're also going to find a couple of single cards called Wrestling Champions. Now, don't be confused with these Wrestling Champions and these figures, which are on single card as Wrestling Champs. Those are going to be two different lines, of course. So, I had these type of figures when I was young, and these are the figures that I called Remco when I was young. And because I thought these were Remco, I don't ever remember having these style figures when I was young. So because I classified these as Remco, I despised Remco when I growing up my entire life. The first time I've ever had Remco figures, these figures right here, is as an adult collector when I started picking up wrestling action figures a few years ago. So, today I say Remco is easily top 3, top 4 all-time favorite wrestling action figures. One of my top 4 most enjoyable line to collect. Hasbro, LJN. Yeah, I mean, I would say Remco is probably my number 3 favorite line among my collections. Maybe I would say Original San Francisco is probably my number 3 if I did have to put another line in front of it. But among the lines I enjoy collecting the most, I don't know. I think maybe Remco is right up there. But they're definitely a top 5 of the ones I gravitate towards the most and ones I really enjoy. So we'll go back to these bootlegs right here. And like I said, I had these because when you look at the legs, the positioning, the way that they kind of bend out in that shape that they do, they could not stand with the darn. And kind of having to use these figures with your Hasbros and your Gloobs, they were a little bit bigger. They were so freaking annoying. I mean, they were definitely the body type. I mean, they were definitely playable figures, but they were bigger than the Hasbros, so they just didn't function as well. And like I said, they didn't stand. They were annoying. I thought these were Remco growing up. I hated the Remco line, and they turned me off to the Remco line for my entire life. So these were just simply Wrestler, or if you buy them on single card, Wrestling Champions. But we will look at another bootleg line, Wrestling Champs. And if you buy these figures on single card, the card backings themselves are very reminiscent to LJN. And when you actually look at the figures, the first 5, Sheik, Hogan, Stud, Snuka, and Andre. So that's very, very LJN reminiscent. And of course, with the body spot, the way that the figures are actually posed, again, very Remco-escent. So it's basically a 2-in-1. So really enjoy these figures as well. Sticking with the bootlegs, Mannix. I think the Mannix figures are possibly one of the top 5, top 6 greatest wrestling action figures out there. And in fact, if they weren't bootleg, these would probably be one of the most coveted wrestling action figures imaginable. And like I said, forget Jakks Pacific, forget any of your Mattel figures of today. These are beautiful, fun wrestling action figures. And they are about the size of your Hasbro, so they could actually function well with, your Hasbros and Gloobs if you choose to. From the Major Wrestling Figure Podcast, and very closely resembling, you got Mark Sterling, and you also have Matt Cardona. And of course, from Ringside Collectibles, we're also going to look at your bell-to-bell figures. So I am going to pause and kind of look at these figures as not individual pieces, but we're going to look at them. Yeah, we'll look at them one by one. Kind of make things a little bit easier. Alright, so I might have to stretch a little bit. So if the positioning isn't the greatest, I do apologize ahead of time. But so with a lot of, I might have to reposition. I'm just kind of, with the AWA Remco figures, a lot of these figures were based on He-Man design. So overly muscular designs with the over muscular tone of the legs, the 200 pack of the abs. No 6-packs here, no 12 packs, no 24 packs, man. They got abs for days. The great thing about the Remco figures, you could say it's a bad thing, you could say it's a good thing, because pretty much all the figures have the exact same fighting pose, right? Like when you look at Baron von Raschke, he has his open hand, his open claw, so his hand positioning is a little bit different than what you get from most of the other figures, which basically give you almost a closed fist most of the time. So slight difference, but most of them, again, they have roughly the same pose, right? So pretty much every single figure is going to have the same body type and generally give you the... Yeah, I'm going to pause this real quick. So it's important to get these figures off the floor, but man, at the same time, I just don't have the right... positioning for it. So yeah, I'm gonna have to get back on the ground for this. I think I should have done this kind of where I'm facing the camera, and I could have just held the figures up to the camera. But I really enjoyed doing it this way, so we're gonna stick with this. So I'll just have to try and make do. But these are the figures that got it all started, and you know what? I enjoy these figures. We never had Remcos as kids, so getting these as a first-time buyer, as an adult, I would have actually enjoyed these as a kid. Now, we're pushing these off to the side, and I wanted to get into these bell-to-bell figures. And yeah, these... So, the Legion of Doom figure in particular, on card, I thought the Remco-Style bell-to-bell Legion of Doom were like a couple of the coolest freaking figures I've ever seen. The cardboard had one of the stiffest, hardest cardboard ever, and it was very reminiscent of the original San Francisco card backings. So that was so freaking cool. Plus, the actual chest plate is actually removable, and this is, you know, nice solid rubber. So the actual chest plate, the spikes and everything, this right here is worth the whole figure in of itself. I don't know, but the figure itself, I mean, I taking these figures off card, and I still have one set on mint on card, and I got a second set that I bought so that I can make videos like this for you guys. Getting them loose, I'm like, man, you know what? These figures just are not as good as I thought. And getting the loose figures, I'm like, you know what? I should probably make a specific video where I could actually take a look at all of the different kind of like Remco-style figures. Kind of tell the fans, like, hey, if you are interested in particular figures, these just don't do it justice. I mean, I don't know what it is. The feel of the figure, it just is not solid. And when I always talk about grippage in the feel of the figure, most of the time when you kind of feel the grip of a Hasbro, almost all Hasbros have a nice grip or feel to the figure. Most LJNs have a nice solid grip to the figure. Remco's, almost all of them, because they all have relatively the same body positioning, have beautiful feel to the figures. But when you grip this figure, the feel just isn't there. I mean, someone else might feel differently, but I don't. I just don't feel the grip is there. The legs, again, it feels very weak. I feel like the legs could break off this figure very easily. So bell to bell on card, I think that Legion of Doom is one of the best looking figures on card, but off card, I think they're very poorly made. And one of the things I did not do is get the Mattel Superstars. And I should have actually added Mattel Superstars to this video. And maybe I will include them right at the end of the video. And you know what? Scott Steiner, I'm not even going to throw him on here. We'll look at one of these figures because we really don't need to be looking at two different figures. They're all the same thing. So next we'll look at one of the bootlegs. Again, if you're getting these guys on 2-pack from the wrestler line, or if you're getting on single card, they are wrestling champions. And the curvature, the way that it kind of cuts out like a number 7, I don't like that. And they just do not stand worth the darn. Like I said, I had these figures, these sort of figures, with the way that they kind of, the way that the legs are squared off, right? And they are horrendous figures. Very playable. We had them, we made use out of them the best we could, but they were not enjoyable pieces. And I think most of these figures came with championship belts, because I remember a lot of these having like really lame gray belts with like a little circular emblems in the middle. I don't know if these, I don't think every single one of these figures came with belts, because like I have a million of these figures mint on card, so I'm trying to remember how many of these actually came with belts. I know not all of them did. Like a lot of these figures came with 2-packs. Like Hogan would be in like almost all of them, and Hogan would come in like different color schemes, and then he'd be having some kind of counterpart. Like almost all of those would have a championship belt. But because these figures, I knew of Remco as a kid, and these are the figures that I thought were Remco. So, and I hated these figures. I always hated Remco. Luckily, eventually, as an adult collector, I kind of learned from my mistakes. And again, here's another one. I'm not even going to look at that. The Major Wrestling Figure Podcast, and the figure from Major Wrestling Figure Podcast. So Matt Cardona, and I think this figure, I actually had this one. I think I kind of messed up, because I think I actually bought this from Russ, and Russ is one of those guys who I bought like a million of my Remco customs from. And when I did my favorite Remco tournament, I had a Matt Cardona custom. I thought it was just a regular Remco custom, but I think it was actually a custom that he utilized from the Major Wrestling Figure Podcast. So that figure technically didn't belong in that Remco Remco tournament, because it's not a Remco figure. It's a Major Wrestling Figure Podcast figure. So I'm looking at this one, and I'm kind of comparing it to Remco, and I'm comparing it to what we get from the Ringside Collectibles Bell to Bell. This is much more comparable to Remco. It does have the much more bulkier leg. So I think the leg is stronger, but still much weaker than Remco. So far, between the 3 main lines, Bell to Bell, Remco, and Major Wrestling Figure Podcast, Remco easily is blowing all of the other lines out of the water. Bell to Bell is very weak. The podcast is okay so far. I'm only looking at a couple of figures, and I got like 5 different figures that they've come out with, Remco-Style. The head sculpt is pretty freaking amazing, but again, you're looking at a modern 2020 figure compared to Remco, which is based on 4 decades ago, so, I mean, that's kind of cheating. If they were basing this on 1980s technology, I think that would be much more comparable, but so far, podcast guys look like they're most comparable to the 80s Remco style figures. Now, we saw the squared off legs from the wrestling champions. Now, these are wrestling champs, which blends both Remco with LJN. As I mentioned, you've got the Remco style bodies kind of bleeding in with LJN with the big 5. plus the LJN style card backs. Now, I never had these type of figures. I never even seen these type of figures until I started collecting. And who was it? So in January of, I believe January 2023, I had that flood in my basement, and that's why basically everything in my basement had to be rearranged. And and someone on my channel, I can't remember, God, it's killing me now. But we were having a conversation on the channel, and one of the topics that we were discussing was kind of going in about picking up bootleg figures. And once we kind of discussed that, like, I had no interest in picking up bootlegs. And all of a sudden, I went all in on bootlegs. And, well, you've seen my wall when you first start walking down the stairs in my basement. My wall is just littered with mint on card after mint on card. It was like 20,000 mint on card bootleg action figures. So I went deep on it. And nowadays, you know, there's other collectors like Andy's Knockoffs on YouTube who I watch. You know, who has, you know, some really amazing wrestling knockoff figures who's pretty spectacular. And you know, I wouldn't have found Andy's Knockoffs without collecting those bootlegs. So, you know, that's a fun channel that I've been able to get into because of my collection. So, but this is a great figure. It's not exactly Remco-esque, but I still classify it probably in my top 3 among Remco-style figures, nonetheless. Maybe top 4, because probably in the top 3, I still probably put the Mannix figures. And like I said, Mannix, I still think that Mannix would go hand in hand with Hasbro. I think if you wanted to put Mannix, Hasbro, Galoob, if you wanted to sit down and have yourself a little wrestling match, Mannix is a little bit bigger, obviously, but I mean they're relatively comparable. Let me see if I get you a relatively. Oh, shoot. Let's see if I get you a good sizing right here. So, oh man, this sucks. So yeah, there's good sizing right there. With the injury to my right shoulder, man, it's painful to kind of stretch out my right arm. So I don't want to stretch out my right arm too much. Sorry. And there's plenty of Mannix figures I could have chosen. I like this Hogan, though, because this one is one of the most rare Mannix figures, because it's got that alternate. And this particular Hogan, I don't even see this Hogan in the U.S. Like, I've only seen this one from UK sellers. So it sucks, because like you can get this one for like $10 from a UK seller, but then you're paying up like $30-$40 for shipping, and it's like, dang. So you always gotta try and find that seller that you're hoping is selling other items of interest, so that you can try and combine shipping or something. Doesn't have obviously the big He-Man abs and everything, but the rest of the body is pretty solid. And unlike all the other figures, I mean, this one stands beautifully on its own, so you never need a stand for something like this. Gorgeous piece all around. And Sterling, we've already looked at all those guys. So I'm actually going to pull one more figure, and that's from the Mattel Superstars, and kind of give you one more comparison. Alright, so this one's a little fun because he's extra tall, and we don't really get any tall figures from Remco. Andre the Giant. Yeah, so Andre, And I mean, you could really go with any of the Mattel Superstars, but when you look at the Mattel Superstars, I've talked about it before. I love the card backings because it kind of gives you that LJN flavor, right? But when you look at the figures on card in package, they look just like Remco figures. And you know what? That's, like I said, that's just like a lot of your bootleg figures. So there was a period not too long ago where I was actually starting to think that I was actually feeling like Mattel Superstars might actually be my third all-time favorite toy line. It was actually that good. And then it got to a point where I was actually starting to get all these duplicates in, or maybe I won a bundle of figures and I had, or I forgot what happened, but I ended up getting a bunch of duplicates and I started opening up a bunch of packages and I realized, wait a minute, these Mattel Superstars suck. And I say it all the time. There are so many figures that in package, Mattel Superstars is one of them. Mattel Superstars on card are unbelievably amazing. But you open up a package and the figures they suck. I'm not a fan of them. Now, like, I look at Andre the Giant in hand and I'm like, this figure is pretty spectacular. So there are a lot of Mattel Superstars that when you open up the package and you know they're pretty spectacular figures, but then there's a lot more that you open up and it's like, nah, I could live without this. So, and a lot of it has to do with the fact that they got like removable hands and stuff like that. I'm like, no, I can deal without that. That doesn't impress me at all. So you kind of look at Mattel Superstars, you look at, from Ringside Collectibles, you look at the, what did I call them? The bell-to-bell figures and Major Wrestling Figure Podcast, and you look at AWA Remco figures, you look at the bootleg figures from Mannix, and Wrestling Champs, and Wrestling Champions, and Wrestler, and am I missing anything? But that's from now. I think that's pretty much it. I'm sure there's more Remco figures or Remco-style figures. I made a hot mess over here, but yeah, it's a hot mess. I'm gonna have to clean this mess up. But essentially, these are. This is the mess I made, but these are the guys that I pulled. But guys, as always, thank you so much for tuning in for this episode. It was supposed to be a lot more prettier than this. But I just wanted to get something in between the tournament and my next video. So tomorrow, Tuesday, I am planning on posting that 1 hour special for the Series 1 complete review of the Hasbro. Now, that's not generally just a review video. It's just kind of more of like a general chat / review type of video. So it's more than just review. It's history and it's kind of like talking about its value, figures, stuff like that. So there's a whole lot more that's going into that video than just, you know, what I like about the figures and in, you know, their function and stuff like that. So yeah, if you're interested, I think it'll be a fun video for those that tune in and give it a watch. But as always, guys, thank you so much for watching, and until next time, goodbye, everybody.